kindergarten kid came up, a kindergartner. Guess what we all did on the outfield? What did we do? We moved all up because this kid can't kick more than just a few feet. And I'm thinking, this is not going to be a fun game. It's not going to be a fun game. Usually you play with, the grade school over here, and the high school plays their game. Not with Paul Whitworth. Everybody's playing together. And I'm being introduced to kickball Paul Whitworth style. He rolled that ball to that little child. That little child barely kicked that ball. It rolled right to Paul Whitworth. Paul Whitworth picked up the ball. Now, I'm expecting him to run up and, tag the kid out or throw it to first baseman. He does a 180 and punts that ball way over our heads. I'm shocked. I've never seen this before. Wait a minute. You picked up the ball and helped the kicker. And you punted it he booted it way over our heads. Now, obviously, the kid made all the bases back to home plate and a point. A kindergartner makes a point for the team. I'm in shock, but I bring the illustration to point out what it means when the Lord is with you as a child. You're His kid. He is ready not to get you out, but to take your little effort toward your Christian life, pick it up and boot it way into outfield for you. That's what it means when the Lord is with you. That kid had the administrator with him. I got over my initial shock by saying to myself, that's not how this game works. I've never seen kickball on this level before. Wow. And the more I thought about it, even till just now, that's cool. I like that. Especially if it was my kid that was up to bat and everybody moves in, yeah. Let the administrator get the ball and you have just been tremendously helped. That's exactly what God did to Joseph. He picked up whatever Joseph's effort was and just booted it over everybody's head, and everybody could see that the Lord was with him. God is on your side. God is on your side. And so I would like to get God on our side. He's not a respecter of persons. I think if we acted a little bit about Joseph, we could find the favor of God. We could find the favor of God like Mary found the favor of God. And God looked down on Mary and said, I want her to be the mother of Jesus. Favor with God. Favor like Daniel had the favor of God. Favor like these other great patriarchs had the favor of God. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's something about them that God said, I'm going to draw close to them. And so I studied. And I want to put together just a short outline of what Joseph was like, that I believe that the Lord took a little notice about a man named Joseph and said, I'm going to pick what he does up and just boot it over everybody's head. And I looked at his life, and number one, he did not expect God. Joseph did not expect God to deliver a problem-free life. He wasn't expecting that from his God. He had no bitterness toward the hard circumstances he had been dealt with in life. The Bible says, and when Joseph's brethren saw that their father was dead, this is at the end of Joseph's life, the end of his father's life, then said Joseph, they said, Joseph will peradventure hate us, and will certainly requite us all the evil which we did unto him. His brother's talking in Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 21. They know they're doomed. They had just realized our brother was sold into slavery. He went to prison for 2 years. Now he's the ruler over all Egypt. And the only thing that he was being nice to us for was he was just doing it out of the kindness of his dad's heart, because he didn't want his dad to see him being mean. Now that dad's gone, he's going to turn around and just give it to us like big brother should, or little brother should. And the Bible says, and they sent a messenger unto Joseph, saying, thy father did command before he died, saying, so shall you say unto Joseph, forgive, I pray thee now, the trespass of thy brethren and their sin. For they did unto thee evil, and now we pray thee, forgive the trespass of thy servants, of the God of thy father. And Joseph wept when he spake unto them, and his brethren also went and fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we be thy servants. And Joseph said unto them, fear not, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass, as it is this day, to save much people alive. Now therefore fear ye not, I will nourish you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spake kindly unto them. He wasn't expecting his whole life to just be hunky-dory, favorite, just a bunch of fun and games. He wasn't expecting that from God. He knew that whatever came his way, God was behind that. Now, his brothers didn't know that, but he just wasn't expecting God to have everything just work out. He was ready for the troubles, knowing that whatever trouble came his way, he wouldn't get bitter about it. He wouldn't have a pity party. He would say, God will work this together for good, and I'm just going to keep traipsing forward. That's a good word, isn't it? Traipsing. Not sure where that comes out in the English language, but I'll just traipsing forward, okay? And so he's just going to keep plodding forward, going down life, realizing that if I just wait it out, I'll see in the end that God is going to work this together for good. I think there's a good verse in Romans about that too, about God working all things together for good. Not that all things are going to be good. It's not good to be sold by your brethren. It's not good to be hated by your brethren. It's not good to be thrown into prison for 2 years because the two guys you said, remember me and give my name to Pharaoh. It wasn't good to be in prison for 2 years, but God was working it out for him to be in charge of every single person basically in the world at that time was Egypt. God worked it out, and he was ready for that. I'm telling you, we as Christians, we don't have to have a problem-free life to be living the abundant life. There's a real devil. He's going to throw things in your way. There's going to be things that happen in the family. There's going to be things that happen in your finances. And I wish I could come up with another F, but it's probably out there. Going to be something in your freedom that's going to happen with the devil throwing your way. And you just need to have a good attitude towards it and say, I've got a God in heaven that's watching over me, and he's going to work this together in the end for good, and I'm just going to have his good attitude, not going to get bitter. Boy, he could have got bitter at his brothers. He had the heavy hand on them at the end. He could have made life really hard for him. But he had, out of the kindness of his heart, saying, am I in God's place? Nah. He said, you meant it for evil. So he knew that they weren't good guys. But he had a God in heaven that could work him out. Number two, I think that God set up and took notice of Joseph and said, I'm going to be with him. When he kicks the ball, I'm going to pick it up, turn around, I'm going to punt it. And everybody's going to go, oh, wow. Not because of his effort, but because of God's effort. He came to the conclusion that God could use anything that happened to him. God could use anything. Genesis chapter 45, verse 7 and 8. God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and a ruler through all the land of Egypt. God can use, I don't care if it's a health problem, God can use that to punt your kickball. A little further down the way, God can use whatever is happening to you right now. If it's a problem, God can just take it and use it. Realize that, and I think that will help God draw a little closer to you and me. Because there's going to be things happen that I don't like in life. If I could have changed that, I would have at the end of the day. Car accident, I would never wish a car accident on anybody, but God can use that. I was going to give an illustration. I don't know if I have a time, but I told the Sunday school class I didn't have time. But just to make a long story short, one of my sons, I have 6 kids. That's why my hair's so gray. Not because of age. Brother Johnson called me young. I like that. But my hair doesn't say young. Okay. And some of you remind me of that too often. Brother Jones, you look grayer. Anyway. I have 6 kids. One of those kids almost died and would have died had it not been for Lyme's disease. Lyme's disease was the problem that we thought was a big problem, but when he got Lyme's disease, it exposed a problem that was even worse than Lyme's. Had he not got Lyme's, the doctors wouldn't have performed all the tests they did to try to figure out what was wrong with my son. His name's Nathan. And so Nathan, at 18 years of age, was diagnosed with coarctation of the aorta. Coarctation of the aorta is what you hear after the person dies, not usually before. That's the athlete that's running down in high school, down the court on a basketball team and just falls over and is dead before anybody can rush out of the bleachers. That's why probably, I think Brother Lovins gives an illustration of being in practice with somebody just went over, and Brother Lovins could give you the name. I don't remember the name right away. Lori can. Johnny Phelps was in practice at basketball in Anderson, Grace Baptist there. And during a practice game, just went over and laid down on the bleachers. They all thought he was too tired, but after several minutes, they started yelling for Johnny Phelps to come back, and he didn't because he died. He probably had the coarctation of the aorta, where your aorta is bent and it can't deliver enough blood to your body, and so in a strenuous activity, you just die. But in all of his problems, God exposed, I would have never wished Lyme's disease on Nathan for anything, but that exposed his problem of the coarctation of the aorta, which saved his life. God worked that out. God worked that out for some tick to bite him, to give him Lyme's disease. Just he could be exposed to having, to a doctor where a doctor could say, we're going to run a bunch of tests to see what's wrong with you. It wasn't coarctation of the aorta causing the symptoms, it was a tick. But that exposed that. And I just came to the conclusion that God could use anything that happens in your life. Not that you would wish that on yourself or wish that on somebody else, but God can use that. Get that attitude. And I think that's probably one of the things that Jesus looked at Joseph and said, I'm just going to draw close to this guy. He's got a good attitude. Number 3, he worked hard. He just was a hard worker. He did not need supervision. Genesis chapter 39, verses 4 through 6, and Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And that's where we come right in the middle of Joseph's life with Potiphar. And it came to pass, from the time that he had made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person, and here's a good verse to go with it, and well-favored. Well-favored. That's because he just decided no matter where I'm at, I'm just going to give it my best. I'm in a strange house. I didn't ask to be here. I got put here. It's not the job that I applied for, but it's a job I have. Not the job that pays good, but it doesn't matter. It's the job God gave me, and I'm just going to serve God while I'm here. And God just picked up his kickball and turned around a 180 and kicked it over the fence. And Potiphar saw that. And he saw that he was being blessed because he had a laborer that God was blessing. Every employer wants an employee that God has blessed. And you can see when you put him in charge of something that God just helps him. I mean, everything he's got his hand on is just working. And you'd like to move him into another position because you'd like to see everything work. Yeah, don't keep him just some little guy that's not in charge of anything. Put him in charge of more. Put him in charge of a lot. I worked at Coral Honda. Going through college. Coral Honda is in Highland, Indiana. They owned a Mercedes and a Volkswagen and a Mercedes-Benz, a Volkswagen, and a Honda and a Mazda. All the same conglomeration right there. They had expanded into 2 buildings, and I was in charge of 1 building. I was in charge of the Honda side of just making the place look immaculate. And so I'm trying to be like Joseph. I'm trying to work hard. It's not a great paying job, but it's a job God gave me. So I just tried to do my best in everything I could do. I tried to make the carpets as clean as they could be. I tried to make the bathrooms as nice as they could be. I tried to landscape the whole place. I tried to make it as nice as I could be, spending their money. All right, and we had a waxed service floor where everything was shiny and waxed. Every week I would put another coat of wax on the service floor. And then I gave the mechanics a hard time for spilling brake fluid on my wax. You don't spill brake fluid, it turns white. And so I'd give them the evil eye, but they wouldn't care. And so I was in charge of this building. I give the illustration because I was going to take a week off. And to take a week off, I had to bring in somebody to take my place. I won't give his name because he might be in the service. I don't know. He might be listening on YouTube, and I don't want to embarrass him, but anyway, he's probably already forgotten. He may not even know the whole story, but he will when I'm done. I brought in this kid from college to take my place for a week, and I spent a day training him on what all you got to do. We had a general manager, his name was Ed. Eddie is what I called him, Eddie. Eddie was in charge of the whole building. And I worked it out with Eddie. Eddie knows he's taken my place. I've trained him. Well, I did my best. And so a week goes by. I come back to my job. And Eddie sees me across the showroom floor, and he gives me one of these. I'm like, oh, man, what's going on? I get called in the general manager's office, Ed. He sits me down, and he says, I'm glad you're back. Why? He says, you won't believe all that this kid did wrong. And he started listing things that went wrong that this kid was put in charge of. I mean, the place just literally, not because I'm a great worker, but because I give an illustration, this kid just didn't do things. God was not with him in the least bit. He said, and he began to name some things that went wrong. He said, Brother Jones. Okay. He said, Randy, he said, it was so bad. Let me tell you how bad it was. He said, at the end of the week, he said, all the power went out, not in just the building, but the block. All the lights went out, electricity, the whole block went down. He said, the first thing I did was yell this kid's name. I yelled his name. And he came running and he said, what did you do now? Now, he had nothing to do with the power outage, but that's how bad it was, okay? You need to be a good worker. Be missed when you leave. He came to the conclusion that God could use anything. He worked hard. He did not need a supervisor. It's sad to say that most people in America need supervision or the job's not going to be done. Don't expect the Lord to be with you if you have to be supervised in everything that you do. If you're an 8-year-old, you ought to be working hard, whether mom and dad are looking or not. If you're an 18-year-old, I promise you, you need to be working hard at your job, whether people are there or not. You need to be attending church whether the pastor's there or not to be a good church member. In the Bible, he didn't need supervision. He didn't need checked on. You know what you do with people that don't need supervision? You make them supervisors. That's exactly what you do. That's exactly what you do. You should not despise supervisors. You should want to be one. It is fun to be in charge of people. No, it's not, because there's a lot of headache. Number 4, the Lord was with him. He was definitely a servant. He was a servant to his dad when he was home. That's why Dad made him a coat of many colors. I believed it was an authority coat. I believe it was whether he's in charge of everybody. When you go check on your brothers and bring back a report, what do you think his brothers didn't like him for? He told on them. Yeah. Supervisors tell on people. That's exactly what they do. He was a servant to his dad. He was a servant to Potiphar. Potiphar said, I'm just going to make you in charge of more. And day went by, a week went by. I'm going to make you in charge of more. And good job. I'm going to make you in charge of more. I don't even have to check on him anymore. This guy's just good at working. He was in charge of the keeper of the prison, looked at him, didn't have to read his resume. He could see this guy works hard. I'm just going to make him in charge of the prison. I'll drink coffee and he can do it. Yeah, that's what supervisors do. They drink coffee. I asked Brother Johnson his blood type, and he said coffee. No, he didn't. But he would if he thought of it. He was in charge of the prison, and the keeper just said, I'm going to make him in charge of more and more. Joseph just loved to serve. He just loved to serve. Could have got bitter at life. Could have said, I don't like this. I shouldn't be here. God's been bad. Not that God is bad, but you could get that attitude that God's just dealt you a bad deck, a bad hand if you're a poker player, which you shouldn't be. And so God does not deal bad hands. No, he wants to help you. if you'll just get a good attitude toward whatever's going on in your life, get an attitude toward your job, it doesn't matter. You work for God. You work for God. Be a supervisor. He loved to serve. That's number 4. He worked hard. And then last of all, he kept, I could make it last of all. Let me make the last one. I've got more. Number 6 out of 6. I'm going to skip 5. He kept his moral convictions because I get going way too long on moral convictions. We need morality back in America. A Joseph-type mentality. Don't expect the Lord to be with you if your morality is out the window. What you watch, what you say, jokes you tell, people you hang around, things that happen in your life. Keep your morality. Number 6, he gave God always the glory. Everything he did, he was just pointing toward heaven. Everything. If he had a dream that he was getting ready to interpret, he would say, God has revealed to me. Use God's name a lot, not in vain, but in praise. God, help me to be the hard worker that I am. God, help me to have the patriotism that I have. Give God the glory in everything. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such an one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? We're talking the leader of Egypt giving what? Praise to not Joseph, but God. Can we find such an one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? Do you reveal Jesus to the people that you work around? Joseph did. If you're a Jesus revealer, this sounds like a different phrase, doesn't it? If you're a different Jesus revealer, then you're a different type of Christian. You shouldn't be keeping your Christianity hid, boxed up, so that nobody knows you're a Christian. They're guessing, they're wondering. And you ought to just be everybody ought to know, including your leaders. Well, does my boss need to know that I'm in love with God? Yes. Does my boss need to know that I serve God? Yes, he does. Mr. Troyer was in charge of both buildings. Eddie was in charge of Coral Honda. Mr. Troyer was in charge of the big one. I got asked to take a young woman home that had brought her car in, and I went to Hyles-Anderson College, and I didn't feel that it would be good for me to be running around with young women alone in the car. That's just my convictions back then as a young teenager. I needed to be chaperoned. I didn't go on, I'd already given up dating without a chaperone. I gave it up in high school. No, college. It was college, not in high school. I dated alone in high school. All right, I told on myself. I did. Yeah, my wife knows it. It wasn't dating my wife at the time, but I had a girlfriend that we would write each other every day. When I was in college, you have Brother Potts shaking his hand. Did you write? Yeah, and we'd always put the stamp on upside down. You know what that means? Upside down stamp? Brother Haynes, it means that you love the person that you're sending the letter to. Yeah. Some of you know that. Now, some of you just got, guess what I learned today, Brother Jones' message? I learned that if you love somebody, yeah, some of you husbands writing anyway, they don't love me. No, that's because they don't know. All right, they need to be taught. You put the stamp on upside down. And so we had dated each other for a year, and then I got underneath some preaching of Dr. Hyles, and he preached a fire out of me, all right? Preach, you shouldn't date alone. You get a chaperone. That's how Brother Hyles would preach. I had to do that for Josiah. I'm practicing up and getting ready for tonight. Yeah. Brother Johnson said I couldn't do that, so I've got to quit. And he changed my mind. And so I had to go home and tell my girlfriend, if you want to keep dating moi, we have to take chaperone. That's a no duh. You're not going to quit dating me. I mean, so yeah, she said, okay, we'll get a chaperone. Wow. Brother Potts like, well, I already know her answer. She surprised me. And no, she said, okay, we'll keep dating. We got a chaperone. Then I go off in Bible college. I'm not about to take somebody home. This is my job. I'm supposed to take them home. I didn't know that signing up for the job. You're supposed to take these women home. They drop their Mercedes off. You take them home. And so I told the shop foreman, I said, I can't do that. He said, you will do that. I said, I can't do that. Well, he went right to Mr. Troyer, the general manager. Well, I didn't know, but I just went off and vacuumed the floor. Okay. Wondering how many minutes I have left before the foreman comes and says, you're dismissed. You can go home. And I'm vacuuming the floor, and Mr. Troyer, the general manager, comes up. And he stops me, and I stop vacuuming. I'm polite enough to turn the vacuum off. And Mr. Troyer says, I understand that you told our foreman that you couldn't take this woman home. I says, no, Mr. Troyer. I says, I've got a conviction that I'm not supposed to be alone in the car with a woman. I always have need a chaperone, and so I can't do that. And Mr. Troyer said, okay, we'll make it work. And I went back to vacuuming. The Lord was with me. He had to be. You fire people for like saying no. Not if the Lord's with you. God just that day picked up my kickball and kicked it out of the park. I said, God can use anything and make it work. And I just love that illustration because God worked for me that day. And He will work for us too if we'll just put some things in our life. Try to get God close to you. It is so beneficial to have an administrator like Paul Whitworth when you're playing kickball. I'd never seen that done before. I like it the more I think about it. I'll probably do that if we ever play kickball for the K through 12. You'll be ready for it. There'll be a lot of kids back there like, you're going to be ready to kick the ball if you got an administrator like Paul Whitworth rolling you the ball. Yeah, we've got a good administrator in heaven, and he wants to help us out. Let's all stand. God can use that message. God can use